Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Have you ever felt powerless in relationships? Like your voice is never heard and your contributions are valueless? Are you unwittingly entrenched in a marginalized relationship? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to explore the balance of power and marginalized relationships is Akilah Riley-Richardson. Akilah is a couples therapist, educator, and researcher with over 18 years of experience as a certified clinical trauma professional. Akilah specializes in relationship healing, focusing on the needs of couples and individuals. Since 2012, she served as a social work educator at the University of Southern Caribbean. She is founder of the Relational Healing Institute and creator of the P.R.I.D.E model. Her upcoming book is entitled Working with Marginalized Couples. Her website, AkilahRiley-Richardson.com. Akilah, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Hi, so good to be with you.
Yeah, so nice. We're stretching across the ocean, aren't we?
Far long, but it's good to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. So, what is a certified clinical trauma professional?
Yeah, so this is somebody who has been trained and certified in various modalities when it comes to working with trauma. So, for example, I would have done some training in EMDR. I would have done some work in somatic work. So there are various modalities that I'm trained in and certified in over the years. And in order to retain certification, you have to do constant training and upgrading.
You have to constantly stay in the know
Yeah.
with the modalities, huh?
Yes.
Well, EMDR is just an amazing format.
Yes.
And do you use it a lot in your practice?
I actually do. I find it to be useful. As you know, it's a somewhat non-directive form of therapy that relies heavily on bilateral stimulation, which is stimulating the right and left hemispheres of the brain. And I've actually found it to be quite useful for some clients. As with all modalities, some modalities will work for some and some will not work for others. But I found that it provides the clients, I should say, with a lot of success where it does in fact work.
It kind of slides in there in a way that other things don't, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I found that what it helps clients to do is be able to trust themselves, because the therapist is not necessarily directing the show. The client is being there and in the process on their own.
That's fantastic. The more tools we get, the better, right?
Yes.
So how did you first become interested in couples and relationship counseling?
I would say that this actually started for me when I was doing my master's in social work. And I found myself intrigued, by just couple dynamics and how it shows up. And over the years, I got more and more intrigued, looking at the work of Sue Johnson, looking at the work of Gottman, etc. And I found that to be very, very valuable. And I love thinking about systems as a social worker. And so being with the couple system, I have to admit, it's one of my best parts of the work that I do.
Well, it's awfully important. I mean, if there's a place where there broods evil,
Yeah.
it's in couples relationships. So, what is a marginalized relationship?
Right. So a marginalized relationship is where either one or both parties are marginalized by society. Yeah. So to be marginalized, it means that you are in some way discriminated against or oppressed or disenfranchised. So you may have several marginalized or one marginalized identity. For example, you might be differently abled, or you may be in the LGBTQI community, or you may be somebody who's a BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or person of color. So there's some quality that you have that makes you at risk for being excluded or oppressed or systemically marginalized in that particular way.
Well, that runs rampant, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Would you define systemic trauma for us?
Yeah, systemic trauma, I'd say, refers to trauma that is being inflicted on us from the system. And when I say the system, I mean things outside of us. For example, the judicial system, the educational system, yeah, the political system. All of these various systems can inflict systemic trauma. So, for example, if you're trying to get into a university and it's difficult to get in because of the color of your skin or your sexual orientation, in that moment you are experiencing systemic trauma. So it's trauma from the system that is around you.
Okay, and that could apply to anyone, couldn't it? Because I remember at the time one of my friends was trying to get into college. He was white male, and they had to have a certain number of women of color, because that was dictated, and he was discriminated against in reverse, kind of. So it can happen to anybody, can't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that I think it's tricky because some groups are historically and consistently marginalized. So I would say that systemic trauma is trauma that's not only inflicted by the system, but it's also chronic and pervasive. So I hear what you're saying in terms of his circumstance, but then of course the experience of a white male in the world is very different from that of a black woman in the world. A black woman is experiencing this consistently. It's more pervasive, more unpredictable, yeah, like in a chronic sense. So in that way, it makes it different because systemic trauma is chronic and pervasive.
And
Yeah.
coming from a lot of sources.
And coming from a lot of sources.
Gotcha. So systemic oppression.
Hmm. Systemic oppression is when you're being denied voice as a result of your own identity. And it's once again from the system.
So nobody wants to hear from you.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear from you. Nobody wants to hear your voice. Nobody
or
wants to hear your take, your perspective.
or validate your
Yeah.
authority in anything. Okay. So please share with us how systemic oppression manifests in intimate relationships.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been working with this for quite some time, and I've noticed a few things. And I'd say, so for example, I worked with a couple once who spoke about inability to be intimate, sexually intimate. And it was because of systemic trauma, and they did not realize. And that's because that constant sense of the body feeling afraid or amped up, yeah, or dysregulated in that way, it takes the social engagement system offline. So it's harder for people to be able to connect sometimes sexually or emotionally in ways that they may want to. Sometimes as well, some couples may opt to hide their relationships. I mean, I've worked with a queer couple once who spoke about queer phobia and the fact that they had to be hiding their relationship. And in those instances, we'd say the couple is experiencing what's called couple level minority stress, and this is where the system itself is scoffed at by the wider society, and so the relationship itself needs to, well, people feel that they have to hide their relationship in that particular way. Yeah, so we see it sometimes in terms of, let's say, aggression between partners. Partners may find themselves feeling very aggressive toward each other, and that's because they just amped up so much because of the stress from the system, or they may withdraw themselves from one another. Or sometimes the interesting thing I was saying to some people is that it's not only the ability to connect, but the ability to disconnect. So all healthy relationships must have, let's say, boundaries. And all healthy relationships must also have times when people say, you know what, this is not healthy for me. I need to move on. But sometimes if the system is pounding on you so in a very rough, tangible way, it makes it very difficult to be able to remove yourself from relationships that are harmful as well, because you may have no other supports out there. Yeah. Or you may not even have the sense of self to be able to do so, because the system is just battling or just hitting at your self-esteem constantly.
And so that if you have a relationship, even if you're hiding it from a system, at least you have a common foe.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So then even if the relationship is becoming extremely dysfunctional, there's a certain amount of things holding you together there, um, because you have a common foe. And otherwise, you just be in the world alone with a foe, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's you're right, and it can help to bring some couples together. Yeah, and I've seen that work I've seen that in my work. Sorry, when I talk about things like relational resilience. Sorry, where couples are able to come together and realize, okay, what's helping us to be resilient in the midst of this. But of course, we can't deny the horrid impact of it, because while in some ways, yes, in some ways, sorry, it brings couples together, sometimes it actually destroys their connection.
Is it because they're under the gun all the time and they start pointing the finger at each other?
What happens? Yeah, I was working with a couple once, and that was actually what was going on. That one partner was just feeling just as if the other partner were constantly attacking her, and that's because her system was so primed for threat all the time that she felt that, yes, this person is always getting at me or trying to get to me. Yeah, so yeah, you're very right.
When we're under siege, sometimes it's really hard to tell where it's coming from, isn't it?
Yes, 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 yes. Especially because of what happens with the brain when we're under siege. When we're under siege, the brain isn't properly integrated. Yeah, differentiated, integrated. Our subcortical regions are very loud. The threat centers in the brain are very loud, and the research is showing us that, Wilda. The research is showing us that, for example, African American couples who may be feeling constantly under siege, they in the relationships, there's more likely to be aggression between partners. So yes, definitely.
So the aggression comes because you're in fight or flight. You're
Yeah,
and so it's anything
yes,
that comes close, kind of like a
yes.
cat in a corner. It's claws anything that gets close.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes, and we don't only see fight or flight. Sometimes we see one partner just shutting down, unable to connect. Yeah, so sometimes we have that, but then also we have this shutdown state. Yeah, when persons just go into this collapse and find it difficult to connect as a result of that.
So that's the freeze part of fight, flight, freeze, right?
Yeah, fight, freeze, and then of course we have the other end, which is this very low tone dorsal vagal collapse that we
Uh,
also see that can happen as well.
So what's that look like?
Persons may be just very numb, very disengaged, appear to be dissociating in the relationship. Um, yeah, that's the kind of thing we would see. Yeah.
Or
And
does it tend to generalize in their life too, that they're kind of
most
disassociating from life in
most
general?
definitely, most definitely, most definitely. You'll see that featuring in their workplaces and other spaces that they're in. Yeah, just walking around the world here, but not really here. That's
Hmm.
one thing you can see as well. Most
Wow,
definitely.
that's got to be a painful place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, do you see people that are dealing with multiple layers of that?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I would have. I mean, when persons' marginalized identities overlap or intersect, yeah, it can feel even more thorny for them. So, for example, if you are a trans man living, a black trans man right now in the U.S., yeah, you have all of these different intersecting identities.
Hmm.
It can definitely make it a lot harder to be able to move through the world every day and to form healthy relationships. So I definitely see that it makes it more thorny.
Yeah. Well, it's time for us to take a station break. Akilah and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Do you feel oppressed? With us this hour discussing systemic oppression is Akilah Riley-Richardson. Her upcoming book, Working with Marginalized Couples. Her website is akilahrilleyricardson.com. Akilah, when we're working with being judged against by everybody in general, and if we come at it because we'll say we're black. I mean, we've been black all our life. Does it start to build on itself to where we're triggered by anything that comes around because it's been happening so long?
Um, I'm very cautious with that question because if someone is triggered, it makes so much sense for them to be triggered. because when you're living in a system that is constantly pounding on you, and when you're, let's for example, if you are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or person of color, and your ancestors have experienced the same thing, if you understand epigenetics, that you have a predisposition as well to notice certain things. And it's legitimate in my opinion. I know sometimes persons may see persons of color as being overly sensitive in some instances, yeah. But so much of that is legitimate because it's happening in so many different ways all of the time. So yes, you can find yourself sometimes being triggered. And I want to also make sure that we recognize the value of the experience of the person who's feeling triggered, because this is happening in very subtle ways all of the time, and so the body has to be primed to notice this, because if you're not, you could literally be killed. So you have to actually be aware. The body has to be aware in order to keep you safe.
And you talked about the epigenetic piece. I find that fascinating. So, would you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely. So the science is showing us, sorry, that if let's say your ancestors had to be aware of certain things or to be alert for certain things, yeah, you could develop a predisposition or proclivity for the same thing as well. Yeah. And so that's a very simplified version of it, right? And I think it's important for us to be aware of that and to understand that, because sometimes we think that what people are experiencing starts with them. Yeah. But what you're experiencing actually starts with your ancestors before you. It's generational stuff that's passed on from one tribe to another, as I say.
So, I suspect that happens to all of us to certain degrees. I mean, that's why we've survived, right? As a
Yes.
species, as we pass on the information. That's not safe. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Is there a way to get in there and heal at that level? If what's coming forth is no longer useful, is there a way to get in there and heal at the epigenetic level?
So if we think about healing, something like that, we have to think about it not being genuinely useful to the body, right? And I want to talk a bit here about memory reconsolidation. So memory reconsolidation is the kind of healing I think that you're referring to, where we basically find a new way of seeing things, or what we were using all the time is no longer useful, right? But for that to happen, the thing that we are primed to experience, the feeling also, needs to be alive and awake in the body. And at the same time, a subjectively disconfirming experience needs to be happening at the same time. But if you don't have those two things, if you're walking around the world feeling afraid and triggered, and the experiences around you are validating that, well, then you're going to remain in that state. But if you are having subjectively disconfirming experiences while your body is in that particular state, yes, over time, yeah, the brain will find no use for it over time. And of course, your genetic predisposition will definitely ease in that regard. There's no need to wake up those things anymore.
So, the clear and present danger is the key there, isn't it?
Yes, most definitely. Most
Well,
definitely.
again, that does make sense. That's why we've survived as a species, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
most
yeah.
definitely.
Um, so, what causes people to be prone to systemic oppression as both the oppressed and the oppressor?
What causes persons to be prone to systemic oppression?
Uh-huh.
Is it
Prone to
okay?
it. Yeah.
Oppressors. What causes persons, oppressive people and oppressive systems cause people who are prone, cause oppression. There are so many spaces in our world where people who hold power and privilege believe that their way of being in the world should be the only way of being in the world. And so it is, their epistemology, their way of knowing the world, their ideologies that are imposed on the rest of the world. And when these things come to the fore, this is what leads to the increased likelihood of systemic harm and systemic trauma.
Well, if all we have to do is look back to the Holocaust, right? I
Yes,
mean, it,
yes,
yeah,
yeah,
an entire society was bamboozled into thinking,
yeah.
and I know the German people look back at that and going, "How did that ever happen?" It does. Yeah, yeah. So, do you find both the oppressed and the oppressor reluctant to shift their position? And if so, why?
As a person who occupies various marginalized identities, I would say that for me, being able to live in a world that feels fair, that feels just, is what my greatest heart's desire is. And I imagine that that is the same for anybody who holds a marginalized identity. We want to live in a fair world. Yeah. And so the ideology that really needs to be shifted is of those who hold power, yeah, who hold power in the world and decide to impose those ideologies consistently and not allow voices of the marginalized. Consistently, marginalized people are fighting to have their voices and their spaces be recognized. And so it is very important for those who hold privilege in the world to take note of that and think of the ways in which moment by moment they can make ideological shifts and do very tangible things, yeah, to open up spaces for persons who are marginalized.
So how about let's talk about one-on-one situation. We're in a relationship, and one person is in the position of power, and the other person is always on the back burner and doesn't feel heard and doesn't feel validated, and that sort of thing. Does that position actually, on some way, serve both of them?
Does that position actually serve? I think oppression only serves those who has power.
That's what I mean. Yes, exactly. So,
Oppression
so,
serves those who have power.
so the person in power will be reluctant to shift the relationship because they want to be the one in power.
Yes, it
Is
serves.
there a backwards way of that where the person that is not in the position of power finds that comfortable because then they don't have to be responsible for anything?
The comfort you'd experience there is what I would call as a safety mechanism, a way to keep yourself safe. Meaning that I tell myself I'm comfortable, yeah, because if I try to respond or if I try to fight for my rights, I could be harmed. So any comfort that I express in a situation like that, where I am being oppressed, where I am being silenced, is my way of keeping myself safe, because all the other ways of keeping myself safe are ways in which that would increase my risk. For example, I've experienced that in certain spheres of my life where I felt very silenced and I had to fool myself into comfort, yeah, in order to believe that in order to keep myself safe in that regard. So that comfort there is directly tied to what's keeping myself safe. So it's an illusion at the end of the day.
They both are really, aren't they?
Hmm.
Yeah, there's no real power in overpowering others. You're
True. There's no real
just a
power.
bully. Yeah. So if you're in a relationship, what are the red flags that you are in a marginalized relationship?
So as I said before, marginalized relationship is one in which the relationship system itself, right, or both part or one party, yeah, has a marginalized identity, or both parties, sorry, have marginalized identities. And once you're experiencing systemic trauma, once you're being denied, let's say, rights to education, or you're not fairly treated by the judicial system, or you're unable to become, or your union isn't legally recognized, chances are you're in a marginalized relationship. If you can't walk in the streets and hold your partner's hand because you may be an interracial couple in a society that's highly racist, or you may be a queer couple in a society that's highly homophobic, in those instances, you're definitely in a marginalized relationship.
How about between the two of you? When you
Yeah,
how can you tell that there's not a balance of power, if you will? What
yeah.
are the red flags there?
I think for what would obtain is that your ability to contribute to the economic, emotional, and social well-being of the relationship will be severely limited if you are unable, not unwilling, but if you are truly unable to contribute in those domains of the relationship. Then it's a chance that you're being oppressed in the relationship. If your views and points around the direction of the relationship are not being heard, chances are you're being marginalized in the relationship. If your ideologies are not being heard, chances are you are in a marginalized relationship.
So what about the person in the position of power? Because I don't think people go out of their way to try to hold power over somebody else, particularly not somebody they love. Can it be something that
Mm.
just kind of slides in there because of your family patterns? How can you recognize that
Yes.
that's actually going on?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, because I think that so many persons have blind spots and they don't even realize when they're doing that. So, for example, let's assume that you're in a relationship where you may be a cis man, right? And your relationship with a trans person. Even in those contexts, your cis normative kind of ideologies may be trying to shape the relationship. Yeah, where you are imposing your understanding of what it means to be all your gender beliefs on that particular person. Yeah. So in and but the thing is that persons who hold power and privilege often believe that their way of seeing the world is the only way of seeing the world. And that is where the blind spot is. So you're right. Sometimes you don't know that you're doing it, but you are. And I think it's so important for persons to avail themselves to reading material and to other kinds of material where they can educate themselves about systemic trauma and marginalization, because many of us don't know that this is what we're doing. It's very easy to practice ableist, racist, or heteronormative beliefs or ideologies in your relationship.
So if you are in relationship, is there sometimes switches back and forth? One circumstance, one person is in power, and another circumstance, the other person is in power. Do the roles switch sometimes?
I think it can. And there's a thing I often say that we all have different domains of privilege and power. Yeah. And marginalization. Sorry. So if I am a white woman in a relationship with a black man, yeah, as a white woman, I may have the racial power, quote unquote, but of course, being a woman, the issues there. And similarly, for a black man, being black might be one thing, but of course, being a man will grant me some. And so as the couple navigates different decisions in their relationship, there are times when male privilege, right, might hold sway, or there are times when, of course, this stuff aligned with racial privilege may hold sway. Yeah, so definitely, I agree with you there.
It seems like it takes a lot of work to be conscious of what's actually going on under the rug, if you
It
will.
does. It does. It does. It does. And that's why I say availing yourself to material is so very important. I even in my own journey, I have to look back at myself and see the ways that I may have been practicing ableism or practicing heterosexism, because I'm a cis het woman. Yeah. And so there are ways in which, if when I'm not careful, I could unconsciously be practicing those things. So I'm in no way immune, yeah, to this reality as well. None of us are.
None of us are. Well, it's time for another station break. Akilah and I will be right back to continue our discussion. Please stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Have you ever wondered what makes your partner tick? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing the anatomy of relationships is Akilah Riley-Richardson. Her website, AKilahRiley-Richardson.com. Akilah, the anatomy of relationship, I think, is pretty fascinating because we have so much of it that's unconscious that we bring from our history, from our epigenetics. What can we do to start to get more in tune with what we're bringing to the table and how it's interfacing with our partner?
Oh, yeah. One of the things that I talk a lot about in my work, and I've learned from my dear colleague Julianne Taylor Shaw, is the value of witnessing mind. And witnessing mind is being able to allow yourself to witness your sensations, your thoughts, your feelings, all of those things, and constantly being in your body. So being able to deepen your sense of attunement with self will help you to know more what you're bringing into a relationship. As I often say to my couple, slow the relationship down. Slow the relationship down. It's so fast paced, Wilda, in the sense that sometimes I look at couples getting into an argument, and when I slow down, we're able to see the anatomy of the argument and consequently the anatomy of the relationship. And what do I mean by that? We're able to see what are the beliefs that have not been tended to that are showing up right here. What are the assumptions of how relationships should work that are showing up right here? What are the unresolved traumatic memories or unresolved trauma? What is showing up right here? And all of those things feed how people show up in relationships. But we can't notice that if we don't turn on what's called our ventromedial prefrontal cortex, big words, but essentially we're turning our witnessing mind to be able to see ourselves. And when we're able to see ourselves, what happens is that we're able to actually soothe ourselves even more and show up better for our partners in a more integrated way.
And so much of us is unconscious, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
right clear down to the epigenetics. Not only what our parents taught us and our bringing up taught us and our culture taught us is this lifetime, but we're
Yeah.
carrying it from our entire. That's a big package. How
Yes.
and a lot of people are afraid to look there. Afraid to question their values and their history and their family's values. It takes a brave person to do this, it looks like.
Yeah, yeah. I want to celebrate all the people that show up to therapy because it's not easy to show up in the room and have somebody walk into your mind with you. There's this saying, I can't remember who it's from. Oh, but it's a dear saying about I'm afraid to go into my mind. I don't know, it's a dangerous place in there. I don't know what I'll I don't know what I'll find. And what this work entails and what being in a relationship entails is walking into your mind all of the time. Just this week, because I'm partnered as well, and I have two wonderful children, and constantly I have to be slowing myself down, and asking myself, okay, what imagination am I living in here? What has not been tended to that is showing up right now in my relationship or with my children? So constantly the way to improve your relationship, constantly slowing it down and tending and looking within.
And there's nothing like being in a relationship or having children that'll push all those buttons so you have some place to look, right?
Yes.
Kids come doing this, don't they? Okay, what personal history tends to cause an individual to be more susceptible to being marginalized?
What personal history?
So, like, we know, okay, I'm born this color or that color, or I'm born, this gender or that
Oh,
gender. But I'm talking
oh,
about what we've experienced within our personal lifetimes that makes us more susceptible.
well, I will maintain that what makes a person susceptible to becoming marginalized is oppressors. Like I don't one what what makes you susceptible to be marginalized are people in the system who believe that you should not have a voice. I think we have to be, I think we have to be so careful because we want to ensure that marginalized people know that they are not increasing, they themselves are not increasing their marginalization. Yeah, they're ableist, racist, heterosexist systems around them that are constantly creating conditions for this to occur. Yeah, I would say that what over time, and the unfortunate thing is that in order to survive and keep yourself safe, you are trained, yeah, to avoid certain things. And when you find yourself being harmed in certain ways, you are told sometimes even by your community peers, well, you shouldn't have gone to this particular street because they harm queer people, or you should know that the police stop you as a black man, just abide, be very don't stand up for yourself. And in those cases, what happens is sadly is we have a form of victim blaming. Yeah, so we have to be very, very, very careful. What leads people to be more at risk for being marginalized are the systems that exist around them. And sometimes we gaslight ourselves. I've done that to myself. I have been in systems where I was harmed and then blamed myself. I'm too sensitive, or I'm too this, or I'm too that. And it is the system's responsibility to create a fair, just system for all. And if persons who have power should have a voice, then I too should have a voice. And when my voice is dismissed or when I am harmed, I have to understand that I must externalize that and not take responsibility for the system's ills.
If But we tend to be conditioned by those circumstances to shut up.
Yes, you are so
Okay.
right. Yes. It's a shame though. We are conditioned to not live in our truth.
Mhm.
Yeah. And if you look at the phenomenal work of men like Ken Hardy, whose work I really, really, really appreciate, he talks about that persons who are marginalized, and in particular in his work he speaks about black folks, but they often have to live a sort of in a bifurcated self. You have two selves: the part of you that knows to speak up, and then the part of you that knows to shut up and hide parts of yourself, and you're so right, Gwilda, that we often have to do that in order to survive, and it's not fair at all. And when you speak up, when you speak up, and of course the difficult circumstances ensue, you then tend to gaslight and blame yourself. Well, I should know that this would happen to me. I put myself at risk. You haven't put yourself at risk. The system is risky, and if speaking and living, yeah, is harmful, then the issue is the system. And I think it's so important for us to recognize that.
The problem being, if the issue is the system, that leaves us powerless to change it unless the system changes.
The system. And but that is why I think we have to really remember the power of community. We have to really remember the power of community, especially now in these times. Communities need to come together. Yeah. So, and as you know, in though I'm cis het, I work with the LGBT community, and as an ally, I lean in, I support. And yes, I have blind spots, and there are things I definitely still have to learn constantly in my journey. But being able to support people in community, so important. Yeah, because communities must come together to drive that change. And communities are also a wonderful self regulating tool, because when we feel consistently overwhelmed by the system, being with another body that feels that could meet us with a sense of alignment and also attunement helps us to be able to regulate ourselves. But community here is essential, and a lot of change is made or can be made when communities come together and stand up.
And that really is across the board at this point,
Yes.
because it seems like we used to live in communities, okay, and they all had a subculture and all this, but then we've become so expansive that there aren't any communities anymore. It's just this hodgepodge of, well, you go on social media to try to create a community. Yeah, people are hungry for it, that
Yeah.
level of support for who you are and what you believe. And at the
Yeah.
same time, we have to be open to other people's ideas, or we're the perpetrator here, right? How do
Yeah.
you balance with that? How do you approach a community in such a way that you can create the support that the members need, and at the same time remain open to things on the outside?
Yeah, it's so interesting you're raising this, because I teach social work at a university here, and just yesterday I was teaching about how to create socially just communities, right? And if to answer your question, I want to think about things such as solidarity, cultural humility, which is knowing that yes, we have strong and powerful views within here, and we also want to listen and understand what's happening outside of us. Exactly what you're mentioning here as well. Yeah, having systems that value principles such as inclusion. Yeah, having systems that value empowerment. Yeah, these things become so important. But yes, you're right. In order to help us to be able to have strong communities, and also not communities that are closed off from other society, other communities, and from the rest of the world, we have to develop solidarity in union with cultural humility. There's so much to learn from outside.
So it seems like we are in a major time of flux. It used to be this culture lived over here and this culture lived over here, and then we never crossed a part. Never ran across each other because of the great distances and the transportation and the this and the that. And now we're coming to a place where everything's being thrown into the pot at once. And it's like, I hope this is growing pains. Do you see a future where we will move on the other side of this?
So I'm just want to make sure that I'm tracking the question. Can you repeat it for me? Can you repeat it for me so I make sure I'm tracking?
Sure. In historically, we had, very segregated communities just because there was distance between them, and we didn't have the internet and this and that. It seems to me like we're suffering the growing pains of everything being thrown together at once.
Right, right.
What is your vision for the outcome of this? Is there a positive outcome?
Um, well, first of all, I don't know if I'd use the word suffering, because, we are in this movement could actually create something that we may need. Yeah, and I can't say where it's going to end. I would not even be so bold as to label it as good or bad. It is what it is, and I trust that. Let me just make sure that I'm thinking this through as I speak. um as with all things, there are going to be challenges, and they're going to be benefits. Yeah, I can say that with the merging of cultures in various ways, yeah, there's sharing of knowledge, there's sharing of information, there's sharing of insight. Yeah. But there's also destruction as well, destruction of value systems that are so important. I think what we want to have is um equitable sharing, egalitarian sharing, two-way sharing. What tends to happen when communities come together is that one group tends to dominate the other group. So if you think about what happens to people like for indigenous people or people in the global south, that sharing is seldom a sharing. Yeah, it's more of an imposition of one culture on
On
another.
top of the other.
Right. Where one
Right.
culture totally disappears. If we can have an equal sharing, equal transfer of information, then I would welcome. There's so much of the global north could benefit from the global south. I live in the global south, and this part of the world has so much richness. But the interesting thing is that global north culture has come into our culture and in some ways dominated our culture. So, for example, our education systems, or the tertiary education systems, largely impose global north ways of understanding the world. Yeah. So you see there, it's not a sharing of information. Yeah, it's an imposition of one culture on another,
On
which
top
some
of the other.
actually call intellectual imperialism. But if cultures can come together and there be equal sharing and not imperialism, then it can certainly be beneficial.
Well, it's time already for another station break. Please stay with us as Akilah and I continue to explore healing marginalized relationships. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Is your relationship beyond repair? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Akilah Riley-Richardson. Her website, AKilahRiley-Richardson.com. Akilah, let's talk a little bit about polarization. It seems like that's what we're looking at. Anytime you get one culture or belief system or subculture judging against the other versus being inclusive, you're looking at polarization.
Hmm.
What is the impact of that on our society and our relationships?
Um, I think that when we have that, we're denying ourselves the gifts of being able to connect, yeah, and to learn. What I'm realizing though over time is that some cultures are feeling the need to protect themselves by pulling away. Yeah. And this definitely happens in the case of marginalized cultures or cultures that have a history of, let's say, slavery or colonialism, etc. But those are usually like subcultures within the cultures. But you're right, it can be problematic. But I also want to say that in some instances, I can understand why many cultures within those cultures, in order to preserve just the authenticity of who they are, might engage in that. What you don't want to have, of course, is a lack of cultural humility. Yeah, which tends to happen with polarization, a lack of cultural humility, where we believe that one is superior to the other. And when you hold that kind of belief, there are other dangerous things that can ensue. So I don't think the answer is simple. Yeah, I think there are many different things that could obtain in a case like that. And I think, yeah, we have to kind of be aware of all of that when we think about this particular idea.
You have to be very careful in this day and age, right? Um, what is the BIOME framework?
Oh, okay. So that's biome, BIOME. So in my work, I talk about the biome, which is what the therapist should be, yeah, when showing up for marginalized clients. So B is for brave, I is for intense or intimate, O is for openness, M is for micro liberatory movements, and E is for epistemic embracing. So, when working with marginalized people, a therapist must be brave. You have to be brave to confront some of your own ideas of how therapy should work or how the world should work, and see the ways in which certain ableist, heterosexist, racist norms be underlying what you say or how you practice. Yeah. And you also kind of have to understand when you see your clients, you have to understand how the wider system is showing up in their relationship. In other words, you have to develop what's called critical consciousness. I is for intensity or intimacy. So I'm leaning here on the work of Ken Hardy in his discussion on taking relational risks. That sometimes we as therapists have to support our clients in being able to know that their pain is real. And we have to do that by taking relational risks. We have to sometimes get angry with them. We have to get forceful. When I say forceful, you have to let them, not angry at them, and angry with them. We have to let them know that what they're experiencing, though it's constantly invisibilized and disenfranchised by our emotion, we are showing that it is real. Openness, which is the O. We have to support our people by being open and letting them know that we will make mistakes in the practice. So, for example, I'm a cishet woman. Yeah. And as a cishet woman, I have to be open about the ways in which I may inadvertently commit harm in therapy. And if I do commit harm, I have to be able to distinguish between intentions and consequences. I have to be able to say, you know what? I did not mean to, but I want to take responsibility for for the consequences. And I'm not going to spend my time excusing and excusing. I'm going to be brave and take responsibility. M is for micro liberatory movement. So we have to understand that as social workers, as therapists, as clinicians, yeah, that we have to see the work we do as liberation work. Everything we do, we're building a sense of agency within the person that sits there in the room. We're liberating them. I like to say therapy is either doing one of two, three things. It's either upholding, transforming, or challenging. There's no apolitical therapy. And the last thing is epistemic embracing, where we're embracing, the client's way of knowing the world, the client's own epistemology.
It seems like, from what you're saying, that the old model of the distant therapist that sits there and never breaks a smile or never breaks a frown is not necessarily going to be your style if you're going by this, right? You have
No,
to be involved.
yeah, yeah. And I would say, I'm so glad you raised that because you see this bit about taking relational risks. I think we have to do it. I think we think that professional means that we must sit and we must never get angry and we must attempt to be calm. Like when I was trained, you were told, don't ever cry, with your client. And today, I know therapists who say that, you know what, sometimes if a client is sharing a deeply painful story and this story has been disenfranchised or invisibilized, and the client has been told that their feelings by other persons around them their feelings are invalid, it's your responsibility to let them know it's valid. And I'm not suggesting that therapists, have a meltdown, but sometimes, but I know clinicians who've said, you know what, I shed a tear or two, and it's been helpful to my clients, to let them know, wait, this thing that I'm feeling is quite real, and it's even more so necessary when dealing with systemic trauma, because systemic trauma is constantly invisibilized all the time.
Yeah, the majority is telling you that you don't have a right to this you're making a big fuss when you really don't have a right to do so. It's about rights in a certain way, isn't it? You don't have a right to feel what you feel.
Yep.
You don't have a
Yep.
right to stand up against the system for yourself.
Yep.
and and there's a certain amount of demoralization that goes along with that, as well as you're afraid for your safety.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And you're right. You do become afraid for your safety, um, and and it can lead you sometimes, like I said, I may have mentioned before, to invalidate yourself. Remember we spoke before about comfort and us appearing comfortable. That comfort sometimes is what you use to keep yourself safe. Yeah, and I think it's so important when you're with a therapist who is trained to understand systemic trauma that they let you know we don't have to be comfortable with this, and I'm going to let you know this in my own actions as well.
So, how does a person find someone that's trained in systemic, is
Just
trained in marginalized, working with marginalized relationships?
Oh, there are so many. So if you're in social work, so a lot of social workers are trained to understand systemic trauma. Yeah. And they if you follow the work of people like, let's say, Jennifer Muller, who talks about decolonizing therapy, or Shauna Marie Brown, some of these amazing humans and persons who follow their work, like even Resma Menakem, people who follow his work, a lot of those persons who follow those leaders in our field, yeah, can definitely be therapists who can support you, yeah, in working through the impact of systemic trauma on your being and your relationships.
'Cause it seems like a very specialized area. I mean, it has a lot of pitfalls in there for if somebody's only trained in normal therapy, I would expect.
Yeah, 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 definitely.
So, what is your P.R.I.D.E model?
Oh, pride, yeah. So P is for pivot, R is for rumble, I is for imagine, D is for develop, E is for evolve. So pivot, it's about turning inward, yeah. That's just looking at yourself and your feelings. Um, Turning outward, which is looking at the system and the system's impact on your relationship. Turning backward, looking at ancestral trauma and the way in which that can be living in your system and creating certain predispositions. Yeah. And of course, turning forward, which is looking forward to create certain things for yourself. Rumbling is asking yourself some hard questions about what you discover when you turn. Yeah. I is for imagining. I want to say, Adrienne Marie Brown, who has some really, really powerful work, talks about the ways in which we can be living in somebody else's imagination and calling it truth. And I think that when persons who are marginalized give themselves the power to imagine, they are in a revolutionary space. And then if they can imagine, they can develop something new. And then E is for evolve, which is who am I now? Now that I've created this new thing, who am I now? Afrofuturist Octavia Butler used to talk about the fact that everything you touch, you change. Yeah. And everything changes you. Everything you touch also changes you. I think I'm getting the quote mixed up a little bit. Um, but there's so much power in moving through the world knowing that you are constantly changing. Yeah.
And that you have the power to change things around you
Yes.
by being
Yes.
present, just by being present and
Yes.
being authentic. Isn't that a huge key here?
But
And marginalized people are not allowed to be authentic.
they're not allowed to be authentic. And I want to say that a big part of being able to have marginalized people be able to live in their truth is for systems to take a hard look at themselves. Yeah, it's not just marginalized people that are supposed to just get up and wake up and try to be different. The systems that impose, if you are an able bodied person and you are teaching and moving the world in an ableist way, then you are creating a system that is unsafe for persons who are differently abled. So, those of us who hold privilege in our bodies need to be mindful of those domains of privilege and see it as our responsibility to shift and change those things.
It's it's just such there's so many moving parts here, it's really hard to keep track of. But if we have our intent and we all align, hopefully we'll see the other side of this to where there isn't marginalization going on. We're
Yeah.
about out of time in the show, and so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, what's your mission?
What I love the question. What's my mission? That's a good question. My mission is to be part of a world and to help create a world where I could be authentic and those around me, especially those who hold less power in the world, can also be authentic. That's my mission.
That's a very, very good mission. Everybody benefits from that, don't they?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Everybody,
And
everybody.
it's hard, but we all do.
And it's like there's so much. value in the world that we're missing because we're holding on to our own viewpoint and not opening to others. Do you see that changing?
Right now, at the stage of the world, right now in 2025, I think we have an uphill battle. Right
Yes,
now.
but sometimes the darkest hour is right before the dawn.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. Well, it's been wonderful having you on the show, and I'd love to have you back sometime.
Yes, it would be wonderful.
But unfortunately, we are out of time. Akilah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
It's been
Thank you,
my pleasure.
Gwilda.
Our guest this hour has been Riley Richardson, a couples therapist, educator, and researcher specializing in relationship healing. To find out more about Akilah and all she has to offer, visit her website, AkilahRiley-Richardson.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy our past archived episodes, please visit www.missionevolution.org. We have lots of shows to show you there and things to choose from, over 300 at this point, and hopefully they will bring you comfort and guidance during these transitional times. But most importantly, please be sure to join us right here as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.